they had Cindy Birdsong was there, and they had been grooming her with tapes for a whole year, and I didn't even have any knowledge of it. I don't know, it caused me to feel more pressure, because it was as if they were saying, we're getting ready to put you out now.
I have a lawsuit going in Motown. So they told you when you left, don't worry, you have $1 million coming to you. You haven't seen a dime of that, as I understand, right?
No, I haven't.
In 1976, the world lost Florence Ballard, the woman who co-founded the Supremes, at just 32 years old. But what most people don't realize is just how tragic her life truly was.
And you're the one who came up with the name, the Supremes, I understand.
Yes.
You brought the group together. You invented the name.
Yes.
Once sharing the spotlight with Diana Ross in Motown's biggest group, Florence's story spiraled from glittering fame to being removed from a music group, betrayal, poverty, depression, and heartbreaking downfall.
In other words, you're telling me you felt that you weren't wanted anymore.
That's right.
When did that happen?
The year, I think it was maybe the end of 65 or 66.
Today we uncover the rise, fall, and shocking controversies of Florence Ballard, a life far more tragic than the world ever knew. Florence Glenda Ballard was born on June 30th, 1943, in Detroit, Michigan. She would later be remembered as Flo, the tall, powerful singer with a voice that could shake a room. In 1959, still just a teenager, she joined with friends Mary Wilson, Diana Ross, and Betty McGlown to form a singing group called the Primettes. It was Florence who actually came up with the group's name.
Yes.
You brought the group together. You invented the name.
Yes.
Just a short time later, Motown signed them, and Berry Gordy renamed them the Supremes. At first, Florence was considered the heart of the group. Many insiders described her as the strongest singer, and she often carried herself as the leader. But things began to change quickly once Motown started pushing Diana Ross to the front. Gordy made it clear that Diana was to become the star. By the early 1960s, Ross was the lead voice on most of their songs, while Florence and Mary Wilson were pushed to the background.
You have your downs.
I interviewed Diana Ross some time ago, and she talked about that time when she was thrust forward and the rest of the girls in the group were pushed.
That was definitely the biggest problem within the...
Still, the Supremes skyrocketed. From 1964 to 1967, they recorded hit after hit. Baby Love, Come See About Me, Stop in the Name of Love, and many others. Florence performed on 16 top 40 singles, 10 of which went to #1. The group became international stars, appearing on TV shows and touring across the world. On stage, Florence wore glamorous gowns and smiled for the cameras, but behind the scenes, tension was growing. Florence was deeply unhappy with the way Diana was being favored. The group had started as a sisterhood, but by the mid-1960s, it was clear to everyone that Berry Gordy was shaping it around Ross.
It was decided by Berry that Diane would take over all leads, and that Florence and I would no longer sing lead.
Friends later recalled how Florence felt pushed aside, not only musically, but personally. She began showing her frustration, sometimes refusing to perform as expected. One of the breaking points came in Las Vegas in 1967. During a Supremes show at the Flamingo Hotel, Florence acted out on stage. While performing, she deliberately poked her stomach out in a mocking way, angered by how the group dynamic had shifted. For Motown, this was the final straw. Not long after, Berry Gordy fired her.
This particular incident at the Flamingo in Las Vegas, I had me a few drinks, and that's not unusual, only to control me, and if he couldn't control me, then he didn't want me around.
Florence Ballard was replaced by Cindy Birdsong, a move that shocked fans but was quickly accepted by Motown's machine. Just like that, the woman who had helped create the Supremes was out. The group went on as Diana Ross and the Supremes, while Florence was left behind.
they had Cindy Birdsong was there, and they had been grooming her with tapes for a whole year, and I didn't even have any knowledge of it.
To the public, it seemed like Florence had simply vanished. She had been at the top, performing in glamorous gowns, standing center stage, and living the dream, and suddenly, she was gone. Few could believe that one of the original Supremes, a founding member of Motown's most famous female act, could be pushed aside so suddenly. But that was only the beginning of her troubles. Florence's exit in 1967 marked the start of a long downward spiral. The same woman who once stood in front of thousands of cheering fans was about to face poverty, failed contracts, and battles that would never be won. When Florence Ballard was forced out of the Supremes in 1967, most fans assumed she would bounce back on her own. After all, she had been part of the most successful girl group in the world. But what happened instead was a heartbreaking decline that nobody saw coming. Motown had little interest in keeping Florence around once Diana Ross became the star. Even though Florence tried to sign with ABC Records shortly after her dismissal, the label did not support her properly. She recorded a handful of songs, but none of them were promoted. Without radio play or Motown's powerful machine behind her, her career stalled. What should have been a fresh start quickly became another disappointment.
What have you been doing since you left the group 8 years ago?
Well, I have 3 children, and I've been trying to do my best as far as saying that they're all right.
The financial struggles came fast. Unlike today's artists, Motown singers did not walk away with huge personal fortunes. Contracts were tightly controlled, and Florence did not own the rights to the Supremes' music. When the check stopped coming, she was left with almost nothing. By the early 1970s, Florence was living in poverty. Accounts from friends and family describe her staying in cheap hotels around Detroit, sometimes without enough money to pay the bills. The glamorous gowns and spotlights were replaced by cramped rooms, children to care for, and daily battles to make ends meet.
You had a lawsuit going with Motown. So they told you when you left no Royalties you had $1 million coming to you. You haven't seen a dime of that, as I understand, right?
No, I haven't.
One of the most disturbing parts of her story is how quickly people seemed to forget her. While Diana Ross was becoming an international icon, Florence, the woman who had actually named the group and helped build its foundation, was struggling to survive in obscurity.
It would not be done to her pocketbook, but to her heart. At the height of the group's popularity,
Mary Wilson, her former bandmate, would later say that Florence lost everything. Not just money, but also her confidence and health. But Florence's troubles weren't only financial. She faced personal heartbreak as well. Her marriage to Thomas Chapman was unstable, and she reportedly turned to alcohol during some of her hardest moments.
Because I got very upset when people said, "Oh, one of the Supremes was an alcoholic, and then she got so fat, and she was this, and she was that." You know, I was like, how cruel can people?
Florence, you drink too much. In other words, I guess I was supposed to say I'm an alcoholic. From drinking 2 or 3 beers.
Friends noted how the pressures of fame, betrayal, and rejection had weighed heavily on her spirit. She admitted how hard things had become and how much she had lost, but she also spoke with hope in some interviews.
To be depressed and drink with depression, I think, can cause a whole bunch of turmoil, especially when you are actually angry.
But life didn't get any easier. She had 6 children to raise, little income, and no major label willing to take a risk on her. Her story was becoming less about music and more about survival. The contrast between Florence's life and Diana Ross's success was so sharp that it became a source of controversy in itself. Fans and critics alike questioned how Motown, and Berry Gordy in particular, could allow one of their own to fall so far without help. By 1976, Florence Ballard's situation was desperate. She had been living in Detroit on public assistance, still hoping to restart her career, but the years of struggle had taken a toll on her health. No one could have guessed that within months, her fight would end in the most tragic way possible. By early 1976, Florence Ballard's life was hanging by a thread. She was only 32 years old, yet she had endured more hardship than most people could imagine. After years of financial struggle, personal heartbreak, and failed comebacks, her health had started to collapse. In January of that year, Florence was admitted to Mount Carmel Mercy Hospital in Detroit. Reports from family members reveal that she had been suffering from deep exhaustion, high blood pressure, and other medical complications that had worsened with time. Her years of stress, combined with alcohol use and untreated conditions, had left her body extremely vulnerable. On February 22, 1976, the shocking news broke. Florence Ballard, founding member of the Supremes, had died of cardiac arrest. She was only 32. The public was stunned. How could one of the original stars of Motown, a woman who once sang before presidents and royalty, die so young and in such a tragic way?
Florence Ballard to die so suddenly at just 32 years old is extremely unusual. It suggests to me she had some unique health.
But almost immediately, questions and suspicions began to rise. Officially, the cause of death was listed as coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in her heart. But to many fans and friends, that explanation didn't feel complete. They pointed out how sudden her decline was, and how she seemed to be on the path toward recovery just before she died. Some reports noted that Florence had recently won a small settlement from a lawsuit against Motown and other parties. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to suggest that maybe she could turn her life around. Friends say she had been optimistic in her final weeks, making plans to take care of her children and possibly even return to music. That sudden hope made her death seem even more suspicious to those closest to her.
Home, Detroit, 2 months before her death. Florence has received some money from an ongoing legal dispute and bought a new home, having been homeless and living on welfare for several months.
The funeral, held in Detroit, brought out a wave of emotion from fans and fellow artists. Mary Wilson and Diana Ross both attended, but even their presence was controversial. Some fans accused Ross of showing up for appearances, despite the bitter history between the two women. Others argued that Ross genuinely wanted to pay her respects, no matter what had happened in the past. The tension at the funeral reflected just how divided people were about Florence's treatment during and after her Supremes years. There were also rumors in Detroit that Florence's death was connected to the deep stress and betrayal she endured from Motown. Some fans even claimed she had been silenced because of things she allegedly knew about the music business. Nothing was ever proven, but the whispers never fully went away. What made it worse was how little coverage her death received compared to her former bandmates' successes. Newspapers ran small articles, but the story faded quickly. For many, it felt like Florence Ballard's entire legacy was being erased. She had gone from a global star to a woman struggling on welfare, and now her tragic death was treated as just another headline. The unanswered questions surrounding her passing would spark even more conspiracy theories in the years to come. Was it really just poor health and bad luck? Or was something more hidden behind the sudden loss of Florence Ballard? Florence Ballard's death didn't just end her story. It ignited decades of suspicion. Almost as soon as the news broke in February 1976, whispers began spreading through Detroit, the Motown fan community, and the wider music world. The official record said heart failure. But to many, that was far too simple. Some fans believed Florence's decline wasn't natural at all. They pointed the finger directly at Motown and its founder, Berry Gordy.
Mention of a brown substance that was found in Florence's gut. Newspaper reports quoting her family have suggested that this might be poison. I want to find out.
Gordy was behind the poisoning.
There are a lot.
According to these claims, Florence was deliberately sidelined to make room for Diana Ross, and once she was no longer useful, she was abandoned. Supporters of this theory argue that the emotional devastation of being pushed out, combined with financial ruin, was just as deadly as any physical illness. They call it murder by neglect. Fueling this belief was the shocking reality of where Florence ended up. She died not in luxury, but in poverty, after living in hotels and surviving on welfare checks. For someone who had co-founded the Supremes, one of the best-selling girl groups of all time, the contrast was unbearable to fans. They asked, how could Motown let one of their own collapse like this? There were also rumors about alcohol and pills. Unofficial reports claimed Florence had been drinking heavily in her final days and might have been using prescription medication. While the hospital listed heart disease as the cause of death, some whispered that her lifestyle and depression, worsened by years of mistreatment, had accelerated her end. But the rumors went deeper. Some conspiracy-minded fans suggested Florence knew too much. They believed she was aware of hidden financial dealings at Motown, favoritism surrounding Diana Ross, and secrets about Berry Gordy's management style. According to these theories, Florence's attempts to fight for royalties or speak out may have put her in danger. There's no hard evidence for this, but the speculation refuses to die.
When angered by Berry, Florence tried to threaten him.
Flo did tell Barry at one point when she got mad at him that she knew his secrets. But she never made those secrets clear to me, and probably not to Barry either.
Another controversial point centered on unpaid royalties. Many believe Florence was cheated out of money she was owed for her years with the Supremes. Just before her death, she had reportedly received a modest legal settlement. But some say she was preparing to push harder for a bigger payout. That possibility has fueled suspicions that certain people in power wanted to keep her quiet. Even Diana Ross's role was pulled into the web of rumors. Fans argued over whether Ross's close connection to Gordy meant Florence never stood a chance at making a comeback. Some went so far as to say the Ross-Gordy alliance ensured Florence would always remain sidelined. Her voice silenced not just in music, but in life. None of these theories were ever proven, but the speculation became part of Florence's legacy. Every anniversary of her death, new debates flare up online, with fans dissecting every detail. Was she simply a victim of poor health and bad luck? Or was she destroyed by the very machine she helped build? What remains clear is that Florence Ballard's end left behind more questions than answers. And those questions have kept her memory alive in ways the official story never could. Behind the Supremes' polished image of matching gowns, perfect harmonies, and chart-topping hits, the tension was boiling. At the center of that tension was Florence Ballard and Diana Ross. Florence was the original founder of the group, even giving it its first name, the Primettes, before Berry Gordy renamed them the Supremes. In the early days, she was the confident leader, bold on stage, sharp with her wit, and protective of the group's identity. But as Motown's vision grew clearer, Gordy began shifting the spotlight away from Florence and firmly onto Diana.
Started becoming really, really famous. We'd get on these shows, and all of a sudden, people would stop talking to Florence and I, and they would direct all the questions to Diana. Why?
This change didn't sit well with Florence. She had the voice, the stage presence, and the original connection with fans. Yet, as the 1960s went on, the marketing of the group turned almost exclusively into a Diana Ross show. By 1964, Ross was singing lead on nearly every hit. Florence, once seen as a cornerstone, was increasingly pushed into the background. The clash between the two women soon became public. Stories circulated of backstage arguments, cold shoulders, and visible frustration during performances. One of the most famous incidents took place in 1967 at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. During a tense show, Florence deliberately poked out her stomach in the middle of a performance, a quiet protest against what she felt was unfair treatment and humiliation. The act embarrassed Gordy and further solidified his decision to remove her. By mid-1967, Gordy replaced Florence with Cindy Birdsong of Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. Diana Ross was officially the star. To outsiders, the switch was sudden, but insiders knew it was the result of years of growing conflict.
They had Cindy Birdsong was there, and they had been grooming her with tapes for a whole year, and I didn't even have any knowledge of it.
Florence never hid her bitterness toward Diana Ross after her firing. She gave interviews where she made it clear that she felt betrayed. To her, Diana hadn't just taken the spotlight, she had played a part in her downfall.
Well, I was a size 12, and I guess next to Diane, maybe I was fat. But as far as I'm concerned, I was pretty damn stacked because and I knew I was well put together.
Ross, meanwhile, rarely addressed Florence directly, but her rising solo career only added salt to the wound. The feud wasn't just personal. It became symbolic of how the music industry worked at the time. Gordy's decision to favor Ross wasn't simply about talent, it was about control, image, and who could be molded into a mainstream superstar. Florence, outspoken and unwilling to play the role assigned to her, clashed with that vision. Diana, who accepted Gordy's leadership and direction, was rewarded with a solo career that made her one of the biggest stars of the 20th century.
Good job of elevating Diane, yes, at the expense of the Supremes, or using the Supremes, which was...
Even after Florence's death in 1976, speculation about their rivalry continued. Some fans believed the feud and the pain of being sidelined contributed to Florence's depression and early decline. Others went further, suggesting the Ross-Gordy connection ensured Florence would never make a comeback, no matter how much talent she still had. The feud between Florence Ballard and Diana Ross remains one of the most talked about conflicts in Motown history. It wasn't just about two singers. It was about power, favoritism, and what happens when one star rises while another is forced into the shadows. After leaving the Supremes, Florence Ballard's problems didn't stop with poverty and hotel living. Much of her downfall was tied to complicated contracts, unpaid royalties, and legal battles that drained her both financially and emotionally. When Florence was pushed out of the Supremes in 1967, she didn't walk away with the wealth people assumed. She signed a release agreement that not only prevented her from ever using the Supremes' name again, but also stripped her of any future royalty entitlements. At first, she was offered small structured payouts, about $15,000 in total. But in the end, she accepted a single one-time payment of roughly $139,804. For an artist who helped launch one of Motown's biggest acts, this was shockingly little compared to what the group continued to earn. Florence later came to believe that the settlement had been mishandled. She accused her attorney, Leonard Bond, of gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty, arguing that he had failed to protect her rights and had possibly even acted in bad faith during the negotiations. She eventually sued him, but it did little to restore what she had lost. The damage was already done. Florence had no royalties, no rights to the Supremes' name, and no steady income.
You had a lawsuit going with Motown. So they told you when you left no Royalties you had $1 million coming to you. You haven't seen a dime of that, as I understand, right?
No, I haven't.
In 1971, she took a bigger step. Florence filed an $8 million lawsuit against Motown, claiming she was owed unpaid royalties and damages. This lawsuit was one of her last major hopes of regaining some financial stability. But the case was dismissed, and she lost the suit entirely. The dismissal left her with nothing but legal bills and an even deeper sense of betrayal. For fans looking back, this lawsuit highlights just how broken the system was for many artists at the time. Adding to her troubles was her solo career at ABC Records. After leaving Motown, Florence recorded singles like "It Doesn't Matter How I Say It" and "Love Ain't Love." Despite her powerful voice, the records flopped. Florence claimed the label didn't promote her work and just wouldn't push it. Whether it was poor promotion or lingering blackballing from Motown insiders, the result was the same. Her solo career failed before it even started. Meanwhile, Florence's struggles with alcoholism only made things worse. Reports say she missed recording sessions, showed up in poor condition, and was sometimes replaced on stage or in the studio by backup singers like the Andantes. This combination of personal battles and industry rejection meant she had little chance of bouncing back.
Because I got very upset when people said, "Oh, one of the Supremes was an alcoholic, and then she got so fat, and she was this, and she was that." You know, I was like, how cruel can people?
By the mid-1970s, Florence Ballard was broke. Friends recalled her relying on welfare, temporary jobs, and even staying in cheap Detroit motels with her 3 young daughters. Fans who remembered her glamorous days on stage were shocked to see her life reduced to such hardship. Her final years were consumed by legal losses, unpaid royalties, and financial ruin. For someone who co-founded the Supremes, a group that sold millions of records worldwide, it was a devastating irony. The system she helped build had left her behind, with no safety net and no reward for her role in creating Motown history.